All right, so let's get into present mode. And welcome to part 2 of chapter 7, learning. In this chapter, we are going to talk about, or this portion of the chapter, we're going to talk about operant conditioning. We know from last time that John Watson was inspired by the works of Pavlov. Well, in this case, operant conditioning was made famous in psychology by a man who worked like Watson, named B.F. Skinner. And B.F. Skinner also had an influence before him. A man named Edward Thorndike, around the turn of the century, looked at behavioral conditioning, which was not known as behavioral conditioning or anything like that. So much like Pavlov using the automatic unconscious brain with classical conditioning, Thorndike designed these puzzle boxes and talked about what he called the law of effect. In this box, normally I start the lecture by asking people what this looks like. And what you can see is this is what Thorndike coined a puzzle box. You can see that there is a door that is closed, so the animal is essentially trapped inside, and that the pin, which would ultimately open this box or open that little door, trap door, is hooked up to a pulley, and at the end of the pulley inside the box is a little lever or pedal. The cat in this picture is observing and checking out the pedal, and so I asked the question, what were to happen if the cat pushed down on the pedal or the lever? Um, and If the cat pushes down on the lever, it would cause the pulley to pull the pin up, and the cat would be able to escape. So freedom is probably one idea that's great for this cat, but what you can see is that there is a bowl of food, which I think for Thorndike was like fish guts or fish bits or something. Cats love that stuff, tuna, salmon, fish, fishy stuff. So in this case, the cat, of course, wants to escape, but there's more motivation for that. The cat wants that food. So Thorndike's law of effect says that if a good thing happens, if the cat does something and it produces something good, meaning the cat pushes the lever and not only is able to escape, but is motivated to get that food, that is what we consider a reward, right? In the last lecture, I talked about an example of if you get your kid to eat broccoli or eat their vegetables, and then you can reward them with some sort of dessert like ice cream. And if they get rewarded, they're more likely to do it in the future. So Thorndike's law of effect says that if that the person or thing, animal, actively, consciously activates on the environment. The cat has to make the conscious decision to make a movement and push down in order to do something, right? It's not an automatic reaction like classical conditioning. And if the cat pushes down on the lever, the door opens and the cat gets access to its reward. Although in this case, the act of escaping might be rewarding enough, the food definitely is rewarding. So, what Thorndike said was, good consequences mean that the animal or person is more likely to do it in the future. If you go to work and they give you a paycheck, you are most likely going to keep showing up for work to keep getting paychecks. So that was the law of effect. And Skinner said, well, it also works both ways. So let me attempt to expand on this. When you do something like pushing down on the lever, if it opens the door and gives you access to food, that causes you or makes you more likely to do that in the future. Exactly what Thorndike said. However, it also works the opposite way. If the cat were to push that lever and that would cause a spray of water into the cat's face, or if the lever contained a small shock that the cat would be administered, or something like that, or maybe even if nothing happens, um, that is a negative consequence, and that makes the cat less likely to ever touch that thing in the future. So the law of effect only looked at the positives, but didn't look at the negatives. So welcome to the world of operant conditioning. In this case, the basic application of this is that we make some sort of conscious decision, conscious behavior to push a lever, to push a button, to do something that we consciously know we're doing, and that either causes a positive consequence where we get rewarded for something, or it produces a negative consequence. So if it is positive, if it's something we like, we call it a reward. If it is something we don't like, very simply, we call it a punishment. And the organisms, whether they're human or animal, associate their own actions with consequences. If I'm a cat and I push the lever and I get to not only escape the box, but get to eat the fish guts, awesome. I am more likely, if put in that situation again, to push that lever more in the future, or even push it faster the next time, because I've associated consciously with the response. I push down, I escape, I eat the rewarding food. If I push the lever and I get what I want, that will increase my behavior. I will do it more in the future. However, if I push that lever and I get a spray to the face or a shock, right? Or maybe even if nothing happens, that is negative to me, and that means it will decrease. So actions followed by reinforcement are always going to increase, and those followed by punishments are going to decrease in this case. So, yeah, that's how this goes. If I were to tell my kiddo to eat his broccoli and he did, I would give him dessert. If I told him to eat his broccoli and he did not, I might take away his Nintendo Switch time. Either way, right, that may cause him to increase that action. So those that are reinforcing, those that are rewarding, means that in the future, we are more likely to do them. If they are punishing, we are less likely to. So bringing this into a more futuristic time in the 1930s, futuristic meaning still 90 years ago, from the puzzle box of Thorndike came the Skinner box that B.F. Skinner was the one who created. In this, we have a speaker, which can play a sound. We have a light, and you see a dispenser for water and food. And just above the food dispenser is a bar. In this case, for mice and rats, you put a mouse or a rat, in this case, that's a rat in the picture, inside the box, and the rat eventually learns to push that bar or lever. If the rat pushes the bar, boom, a pellet of food appears down below in the food dispenser. What's going on outside the box is that there is a counter that counts how many times the rat pushes the lever. So it can basically, without computers in the 1930s, it was able to record how many times the rat pushed the lever. The more the rat got rewarded with food, the more times in the future those rats would press the lever. So Skinner again expanded on Thorndike's law of effect, which meant that yes, when there was a rewarding or reinforcing stimulus, when it was something that they liked, they tended to do it more. But he also said that if they didn't like it and they got something they didn't like, that it would cause them to do it less. So he developed this behavioral technology and the principles of behavioral control. Remember, when we talked about again, I always say when I talked about the definition, and the book talked about the definition, so I guess that is of behaviorism, it was to be able to predict and control behavior. So we understand fundamentally, hopefully, that with Watson and classical conditioning, it was all unconscious anyway. So the easiest way to argue that psychology should be about observable behavior and not about mental processes was from Watson's side. He said, look, it's unconscious anyway. You're doing it automatically. You're not even aware that you're learning. So what would mental processes have to do with this, right? Pretty fair argument, if you ask me. With Skinner and his Skinner box for experiments, recording responses and things like that, Skinner said, well, yes, it's conscious, but if you look at it this way, um, just like with Watson, there is no need for mental processes. Why do I say this? All you got to do is look at their behavior. If these principles hold true, anything that the person or the animal likes, if they like the response after they make a movement or they do something, uh, the consequence, if it's positive, will cause them to do it more. All you have to do is watch their behavior. If they increase that behavior, well, then that means that they liked it. Doesn't matter what it is. That's all we need to know, is they've increased their behavior so we can see that they liked it. If it was punishing and they didn't like it, guess what? They're going to decrease their behavior. So if you see somebody decrease their behavior, you don't need to know what they're thinking. You automatically already know from their behavior. If they do it more, it's because they liked the outcome, it was rewarding. If they do it less, it's because they didn't like the outcome and it was punishing, right? So what do we need thought processes for? If they do it more, we know they already liked it. There's not much more we need to know about that. If they do it less, they didn't like it. And again, there's not much more we need to know about that. So that's why behaviorism was so dominant, because it seemed like they were right. And whether it's unconscious and you don't even know you're learning, or whether it's conscious, but we already know based on your responses, that's why it was such a convincing argument that behaviorism should not involve any mental processes, and they don't really mean anything. Uh, Skinner would argue that mental processes just would confirm what you already saw from their behavior. They liked it or they didn't like it. So, in operant conditioning, which separates it from classical conditioning, is it's a conscious matter of learning. You make a conscious decision and you make a behavior. And if that behavior elicits a reward or something positive, you are more likely to do it in the future. If my kid eats his broccoli, he is more likely to get dessert at the end of the meal, which means in the future he will eat more broccoli or vegetables. Um, if he does not like it, right? If he gets something punishing, if he does something like writing on the walls and he gets punished for it, a spanking, a timeout, he gets some of his switch time taken away, he is less likely to do it in the future. So we use the terms reinforcement and punishment for positive and negative outcomes or consequences, if you will. So in operant conditioning, the principle behind it is that everyday behaviors are continually reinforced and continually shaped. Now, what that means is, for reinforcement, it's anything that strengthens the response. So, it doesn't have to be dessert that I give him. It could be extra screen time. It could be more time to play outside. It could be money that I give him, because he knows that money is good because it can be used to buy things like Pokemon cards. That's what he's into right now, right? So it doesn't have to be dessert, and it doesn't have to be, something like that. Anything that strengthens the response is what we would call a reinforcement. Anything that's positive, that causes more of that response in the future. But we are on a very, very, very simple level here, right? We're talking about pushing a lever for an animal to get some food, or we're talking about, my kid eating his vegetables in order to get some ice cream. Um, you're not going to be able to, you know, be able to climb a mountain after the first day. It's just not happening. And sometimes these behaviors that we give, or that we try to get people to do, their ultimate goal behavior, is a lot more complicated than just eating a vegetable. So usually we do it by guiding their behavior towards closer and closer approximations of this desired behavior. And I'm about to give you my ultimate example in just a second, but we call this shaping because, again, you're not going to go from 0 to step 100 on the first day. And you wouldn't be able to do that just by 1 or 2 little rewards. So shaping is this process of guiding you closer and closer to your desired goal. So what is a good example of this? And I know that a lot of you in this class don't have children, but maybe you have siblings, maybe you have cousins, nieces, nephews that need to learn a great deal about things. So for operant conditioning, the best real world example of this would be parenting. All behavior that the children are doing that are good, that you want them to do, a lot of times gets reinforced so they continue to do that. And all the behaviors that are bad, saying bad words, writing on the walls, doing things they're not supposed to, they get punished for. And the idea is hopefully they do it less or they stop doing it because they know it's bad. And this teaches them how to behave accordingly in the real world as they're growing up. So for shaping, one of the things that children need to learn to do around the age of 3 or so, some a little before, some a little after when they're ready, is potty training. And that is something that you're not going to be able to get a child, a toddler, to go from 0, from pooping and peeing in their diaper, to going on the potty in one step. You can't just be like, all right, kid, here you go. Here's a potty. Now you just go into that instead of using your diaper, and, that'll be good. No, they're not going from 0 to potty trained in one step. So a lot of times you have to shape their behavior. You have to guide them towards closer and closer approximations. So we'll use this example. I will use this example throughout this lecture. And at the end, I'll try to put it into perspective. So the way that we do this is to usually reward baby steps, if you will. The kid is comfortable going whenever they want. Doesn't matter what their body tells them, and they just use the diaper, and that's that, and you change them when you notice it. Or maybe when they're old enough, they can say, okay, I had something in my diaper, can you change it now, right? Maybe. Might be wishful thinking as a parent, right? So when you're getting ready to do a potty training, the potty can be really scary, right? Because they're giving up some sense of control in that sense. And they're young and it's scary. So what we did and what most people do is use this shaping procedure. So you first tell them, okay, you can still keep your diaper on. I just want you to sit on this little potty. You can close the lid, make it like a chair. And just sitting on it, maybe you want to reward them with something they really like chocolate. With Dr. C, Carter, we used an M&M. So just sit on the potty. If you sit on the potty, we'll give you an M&M. So for the first 10 or so times, just sitting on the potty led to an M&M for him, and he loved that. It was rewarding, so he did it. Once he got that down pretty well, now we want to move closer towards that goal. So now we say, okay, you're not going to get an M&M now until you lift up the lid and just sit on the seat. So now you're sitting on the seat, still in your diaper, right? We're just guiding a little bit closer. We're not taking leaps. We're just taking baby steps. So just sit on the potty with the lid open, on your throne. And when you do that and you become comfortable with that for the first 10 or 12 times, you'll get a reward. Eventually, if we get towards step 3 or so, we say, okay, now I want you to sit on the potty, but without your diaper. So put your bare bottom on the potty. Okay, this may be taking a little more coaxing to do, but remember, you're going to get M&Ms. Oh, okay. So takes off the diaper, puts his bare bottom on the potty. Doesn't have to go, just has to sit there without the diaper on, right? So now we're getting closer and closer towards the behavior. Eventually, now you have to sit on the potty and actually do something, whether it's number 1 or number 2. And then finally, for the desired goal, not only do you have them sitting and going on the potty, but when their body tells them to go, oh, you feel it? Okay, now take off your diaper, or I'll take it off, or your pull-ups or whatever they are, and go on the potty when it's time to go. And if you go in the potty and not in the diaper, you're going to get your reward. And that's how you use shaping to potty train, basically. So, looking at the terminology for operant conditioning, it is really easy to get caught up in the wording of things. I usually give a handout, and I have to see if I have an electronic copy of it. If not, I'm sure that I can find one pretty easily online that I can attach to this, to the lectures and links. But we want to make sure with terminology that we use the proper terminology. So as I already established, and as the book talks about, anything that causes an increase in behavior, and again, I'll go back a couple slides for this, right? Anything, if you look down at the bottom, actions followed by reinforcement are ones that increase. So what that means is anything that causes your behavior to increase, we call it a reinforcer. So reinforcement is always going to mean an increase in behavior. Punishment, as we'll get to a little later, means a decrease in behavior. But there are two types of reinforcement, as you see on this slide, and there are two types of punishment. Now, we usually associate the word positive with something good, and we usually associate the word negative with something bad. But we already have words for increase and decrease, or good and bad. Reinforcement is good, causes an increase in behavior. Punishment is bad in that case, right? Causes a decrease in behavior. However, there are different ways to get to this response. That's where positive and negative comes in. I don't want you to get caught up in the terminology of positive and negative, because in this case, positive doesn't mean good and negative doesn't mean bad. Positive means introducing something into the equation or into the situation. Negative means taking something away. So positive reinforcement is something that you give that causes their behavior to improve or increase. If my child eats his broccoli, I will give him something he likes. I will give him dessert, usually ice cream or something like that. If he gets that ice cream for eating his broccoli, he is more likely to eat it in the future. So again, positive reinforcement whoa, a lot of emails coming in. Positive reinforcement increases behaviors by presenting something positive. Ice cream, a paycheck, something that you like. Pokemon cards for him, right? So a positive reinforcer is any stimulus that when it's presented to him, when it's introduced, when it's added in, it strengthens the response. I will give you money. I will give you a Pokemon card. I will give you dessert. All of those things will result in him doing it more in the future because he likes those things. Those are positive reinforcers. Positive means introducing something in. So we have positive reinforcement, and then we have what we call negative reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is also a type of reinforcement, which means the ultimate goal is to increase the behavior, but not by introducing something. Positive means introducing something. Negative means taking something away. So negative reinforcement increases behaviors by stopping or reducing something negative. If I'm doing something you don't like, I will stop that or take that thing away in order to get you to increase your behavior. Again, if it has the word reinforcement in it, it means to increase your behavior. Positive reinforcement is increasing your behavior by introducing or giving you something you like. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is getting you also to increase your behavior, but this time it's taking away something you don't like. So any stimulus that when removed after the response strengthens the response. An easy example of this one is, I'm sure you guys get this a lot, or you did if or when you lived at home, is that your parents wanted you to clean your room. If I want Dr. C to clean his room, I keep bugging him until he does it, right? So I tell him, hey, Carter, clean your room. No, clean your room. No, 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 don't go play video games. Don't go do this. Don't play with the dog. Go clean your room now. When he finally does clean his room, which is, again, that behavior is strengthened, so it's reinforcing, he actually does the thing I asked. Most of the time, he does it so that I will remove my nagging. Stop yelling at him to do it, and he'll do it. So we call this negative reinforcement. It is reinforcement because away that negative thing. That is what we mean by negative reinforcement. Think about when you're at a red light. Now, I don't text while I drive, but sometimes if I'm stuck at a red light, I might respond to somebody to do that while the light is red and I'm not actually in motion, right? Whether or not it can wait, that's probably a different issue, but I try to be at least that responsible. Especially in LA when we have traffic, because we have lots of it when things are running smoothly. And the light turns green. What happens if I don't look up right away? Yep, you guessed it. I will get honked at. Right? Not like the last lecture where it was like, auga. This is not 120 years ago. So I get honked at and I go, oh, I better go, right? Why am I increasing my behavior of hitting my foot on the gas? So I can get them to stop honking at me. In that case, the honking serves as a negative reinforcement, right? I am going and putting my foot on the gas in order to get them to stop honking at me. That is a negative reinforcement. Another example of a negative reinforcement is a lot of times we have pain. And what happens if we have pain? What do we do to make that pain go away? Well, depending on what the pain is, let's say you maybe sprained your ankle doing something and you want that pain to go away, you increase your behavior of taking some sort of medication. In this case, if it's over the counter, some type of Tylenol or Advil, or Aleve or something like that. So you are increasing your behavior of taking medicine in order to make the negative thing go away, to make the pain go away. So taking a pain pill, taking medication to make pain go away is another example of negative reinforcement. Now I've given you a good number of examples, and of course I will provide you links that have more. Let's talk about now the type of reinforcers. So for operant conditioning, a primary reinforcer is one that is unlearned. Basically, it's rewarding and we don't have to learn that it's rewarding. We talked about in classical conditioning that food a lot of times serves as an unconditioned stimulus because we need food in order to survive. And a lot of times some food is better looking, better tasting than others. A lot of times we use food as a reward. I already talked about dessert for my kiddo if he eats his vegetables. Well, if we're on a diet and we're trying to restrict ourselves, and we teach ourselves that if we were to stick to our diet for 6 days of the week or stick to our gym regimen, that we could reward ourselves by a cheat day or having something that's not on our diet on that day. That would serve as a reward. So a primary type of reinforcer is one that is unlearned. It's one that we automatically know. We call it innate, which means like sort of instinctual, that we're born with it. Things we know that are reinforcing: praise, hugs, unless you're very antisocial, things like that, and especially good tasting food. We don't have to learn that it means anything. We already know that we like it. We probably like it before we even realize that we like it, right? Or we have a secondary reinforcer, which we call conditioned. When we think about classical conditioning, think about the bell. The bell doesn't mean anything from the last lecture until it is paired with food. Once you pair it with the food, it becomes a conditioned stimulus, right? It goes from neutral to conditioned. So it gains its power through its association. In this case, when children are born, obviously, they do not know what money is. It may look funny, smell funny. I wouldn't put it in your mouth because we don't know where it's been, especially in this day and age. But money, as they learn, is exchanged for things that they may like. So that food that they like, we need money in order to buy it. Therefore, when you give kids a reward of money, and they're really little, they may not understand why you're giving them that. I don't want that. That doesn't make me happy. That's not a reinforcer. But once they learn that money can get them the things that they like, toys, food, dessert, right? Things like that, then it becomes powerful. Then you can give them money for doing chores and doing things right. And eventually they can use that money to get the things that they really like. So that's why it's a conditioned or secondary reinforcer, because originally you have to learn that it's associated with something else in order to make it good, something that they like. Children would not go to work when they're little if they don't know what money is and they get a piece of paper with a check, with an amount of money written on it. They'd be like, what do I do with this? Once they learn that that gets them the things they like, then it becomes powerful. We also have two types of time dependent ways of reinforcing. Especially with children, you want to give it to them immediately. If I tell my son, eat your broccoli, and then next Tuesday I'll give you some dessert, chances are he ain't going to listen. But if I say, once you finish that last piece of broccoli, that little green tree, then I'll give you ice cream right away, just as soon as you finish. In fact, you don't even have to be done chewing it. Just put it in your mouth and get the process going, and I'll go right to the freezer and scoop you some ice cream. So there's immediate reinforcers, which occur right after a behavior, and delayed reinforcers, which can involve a time period. If you go to work, chances are you get paid maybe once a week. A lot of you get paid once every 2 weeks. I get paid once a month. So I still come back and I do it, and I'm appreciative of my job and everything, especially this time. But it's a delayed reinforcement. The older you get, the more used to delayed reinforcers you are. The older a child gets, the more you can say, okay, if you get, an A in this class, I'll get you blah, 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 maybe a car. That'd be nice. People who are addicted to drugs, they're going to want immediate reinforcers. Actually, if I were to tell you guys that I will give, if you're sitting in a classroom and we just started 20 minutes ago, I say, if you leave right now, I'll give everybody $5. Or if I say, wait till the end, I think I went over this example with you guys in class anyway. So I'm just refreshing your memory. Or if I say, wait till the end of the period, I will give everybody $20. There wouldn't be many of you that would just take the 5 and run. But children would do that, and people addicted to drugs, because it shuts down their prefrontal cortex, inhibits it at least, maybe not completely shuts it down, and they become very impulsive, and they would just rather have their reward now, even if it's a lot less. So with classical conditioning, one of the things that Pavlov realized, and of course Watson after that, is that if we don't always ring the bell when we're giving the food, right, that A, the brain may not make that association, or if it does, it takes a lot longer. So if you do it the right way, bell food, bell food, bell food, it should only take about 15 to 20 times before we can fully develop. Remember, we call that acquisition. In this case, when you're giving a reward, and you reward every time, like classical conditioning, you'll probably get to acquisition pretty quickly. But if I'm giving my kid M&Ms and he decides that he wants to sit on the potty for M&Ms, and then he just comes up and he's like, look, Dad, I sat on the potty, and he does it like 100 times a day, are you going to responsibly give your kid 100 M&Ms in a day? Probably not, right? So one of the things with making it a conscious decision and operant conditioning that Skinner realized pretty early on is, what if I put them on a schedule? And of course, he used animals too before humans. So what if I put these animals on a reinforcement schedule? I could give it to them every time, at least initially, right? Again, for teaching the kid to be potty trained. You maybe the first 10 or 12 times they get an M&M, and then once that's done, all right, let's move on to the second thing. So continuous reinforcement. So a reinforcement schedule is a pattern that defines how often a desired response will be reinforced. Even if I switch to every 2 times that he sat on the potty, he'd get an M&M, he's still making out like a bandit and getting a lot of chocolate, right? So if we were to give it to him every single time, we call that a continuous reinforcement schedule. That involves reinforcing the desired response every time it occurs. So a rat in a box, in a Skinner box, every time it pushes the lever, it'll get a little pellet of food. But once they've already initially learned and initially increased that behavior, in order to keep it going, a lot of times we can switch to a partial, or what we call intermittent, reinforcement schedule. And this is a schedule that reinforces a response only part of the time, some of the time, not all the time. Yes, it results in a slower acquisition. It may take a little longer, a little more trials or more time to get the desired response going. But here's the beauty in that part is, remember how fast extinction went in classical conditioning, right? Bell food, bell food, bell food, and then just bell, 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 bell with no food. That response extinguished pretty quickly. So even though it may take longer to learn fully to acquisition in operant conditioning, if you only use a partial reinforcer, it also means that it's greater resistance to extinction. So it takes longer to reinforce, but it also takes longer to extinguish, because there's always a chance that they'll still get that reward. When you ring the bell every time to the dog and give it food, and then you ring the bell without the food, it's pretty quick to, the brain of the dog is pretty quick to understand, oh, there's no more food coming. Here, you're giving it to them some of the time, so there's still a chance that you'll get that chocolate or that reward. So much greater resistance than extinction. Continuous reinforcement, really quick to acquisition, really quick to extinguish. Partial reinforcement is slower for both. And that's an advantage, because you probably at that point don't want to extinguish behaviors that are good, right? Hopefully that's not confusing. So I'm going to go back to this after. I've always meant to move this slide back one before in my regular lecture, and I guess I just forget about it, or I'm too lazy to do it. Who knows? But I'm going to come back to this one. So let's look at these schedules of reinforcement. And then eventually I will switch the order of those slides around whenever we get back into a classroom. So you guys won't have to worry about it. So we have schedules that are across the top fixed, or we have ones that are variable. Fixed means every so either many responses or often after a certain number. And that could be a number of responses, or it could be a certain amount of time. Either way, it's fixed. So every one of those things that's scheduled is when you get that reward. If it's variable, then it's just unpredictable. You could do it after a certain amount of time or a certain amount of responses, and then the next time will not be the same. So that's fixed and variable. And then we have two ways of delivering it. You can deliver a reward after a response. I'm not going to give my son a reward if he sits there with his broccoli for half an hour and doesn't eat it. I'm going to give him the reward when he actually makes a response, which is eating the broccoli. That is a ratio. A ratio is a number of responses. Interval refers to an amount of time. So if you do things for half an hour, if you practice your piano lessons for half an hour, I will give you a reward of playing video games, or I'll give you a piece of chocolate or something after that amount of time. So fixed ratio, fixed interval, variable ratio, and variable interval. A fixed ratio means every so many responses. It's reinforcement after nth behavior, such as a frequent buyer card. If you go to your favorite coffee shop and they give you one of those cards, every time you buy 10 coffees, right, they'll punch the card, or put it in the system and swipe it, and the 11th coffee becomes free. Or if workers are paid to make masks and you say, for every mask you make, I'll give you $5 or something like that, they get paid per unit that they make, right? For every time you mow a lawn, you're going to get $10. That would be a fixed ratio. Fixed interval is an amount of time. For every half hour you practice piano, you get, one game on the Switch. So reinforcement for a behavior after a fixed time. A lot of us love Taco Tuesday because of discount tacos, right? It's awesome, especially if you love tacos. Maybe not so awesome if you don't. So you know that every Tuesday, if your favorite Mexican place runs a taqueria, maybe, if your favorite taqueria runs that special discount and you get discount tacos, every Tuesday if you go, you're going to get discount tacos. So every Tuesday would be a fixed interval, every amount of time. You're going to get a paycheck every week or every 2 weeks, or if you're me, every month at the end of the month. Variable just means unpredictable. So a variable ratio would be an unpredictable number of responses. And the best probably example of this would be playing slot machines. When you put money in and you pull the lever, sometimes you'll get money out, sometimes you won't. And it's not like every 5 times you put it in, you're going to do it. Nope. Sometimes the first time you put a coin in or swipe it now, because it's all electronic technology. So you swipe it and you push the button or pull the lever down, and maybe the first time you get a bunch of money back. And then you try it 20 more times and it doesn't work. And on the 22nd try, you get some money back. And you don't know if it's going to be a little or if you're going to hit the jackpot, right? So that's a variable ratio. Another example that the book provides, and you can see here, is fly fishing. So you put, your bait on the hook and you throw that hook into the lake or the ocean or wherever you're fishing. And sometimes you're going to get a fish, sometimes you're not, and most of the time you're not, right? So maybe the 4th time you throw the hook in with the bait, you get a fish, and then maybe it doesn't happen again until the 106th time, right? We don't have this, there's no predictable number. It's not a fixed ratio, it's variable. And then the last one is variable interval, which means unpredictable amount of time. You may get rewarded after 5 minutes, and then you may not get rewarded again until like 3 days later. So it's reinforcement for behavior after a random amount of time. And a good way that the book puts it into perspective is, let's say that you wrote a really good, you thought it was a really good or really clever Facebook post, and you want to see if people are going to respond, or Twitter or Instagram picture or something like that, obviously, a good TikTok video maybe. And you want to see if people are going to respond, how many likes it's going to get. Or maybe you targeted a certain person that you might have a crush on or something like that. And you're waiting to see if they are going to respond. So guess what? You keep checking back. And, maybe 2 minutes after you do it, you get 20 likes. And maybe you get 1 like again in an hour. And maybe by the next day, you get, 50 more likes. It is an unpredictable amount of time. So these are the 4 schedules of reinforcement. Going back to this slide, I finally did it for the first time in the right order. What Skinner did in the 1960s was Skinner didn't just have, and as you'll see from one of the videos that I've provided, Skinner didn't just use rats. Skinner also liked to use pigeons, because pigeons could be trained pretty easily. So in 1961, Skinner took these 4 schedules of reinforcement, and he had, basically, like the rat in the Skinner box, he had pigeons pecking a lever in order to get birdseed. And so he would use ratio and interval to give them 4 different schedules. And the reinforcers, as you can see, which would be the food reward, the seed, would be rewarded after, depending on the schedule. So in the fixed ratio, you can see every, we'll say 100 responses or whatever it was, 125 pecks got birdseed. So every time that the counter Skinner box went up to 125 or whatever it was, they would get seed. Variable ratio, they could have done it, here 15 times, and then 5 more times they got another reward, and then they didn't get another one until they were up to like 750 responses. So there was like 500 responses in between, right? Variable ratio. On the third one, we see a fixed interval. So it didn't matter how many times they pecked, they were going to get birdseed every 15 minutes or so. So the first one was at 25 minutes in. The next one was at about 40 minutes in, right? We'll call it, 10 to 15 minutes, every 10 minutes that they got a response. So we see rapid responding near the time of reinforcement in this case. And the last one was the variable interval. So sometimes they got it after 2 minutes, sometimes they got it after 10 minutes. There was no specific time, but the variable interval was an amount of time. Here we see the patterns for these different schedules of reinforcement. Fixed ratio, we see a huge increase the whole time, a lot of pushing of the lever. In variable ratio, we also see a pretty big, steep increase. Fixed interval, we see kind of a steady one that kind of has little drops in it. And then the very last one is variable interval. And it is the only one that what I'm accustomed to seeing in a graph is a nice straight increasing line. So one of the things that this says, and normally I give people the time to read this, and I say, which of these four schedules seems to respond with the most steady responding? And that straight line indicates the steady responding. So spoiler alert, the answer is variable interval. That's the only one that has a nice straight line that's not jagged or dipping or anything like that. And the question I have for you guys to think about is why? This is that question that I would pose to the class. Why do you think that a variable interval has the most steady responding? And like that possible look on your face right now, you're probably thinking, I have no idea why it would, right? First of all, it is an unpredictable amount of time. So I may get a reward in 5 minutes. I may not get one for a week. I don't know. So why would that result in the most steady responding? Well, the answer to this is because you always have to be prepared in this case, if you have no idea when it's coming. And you know, as humans, that you're not responsible for making responses. It's not a variable ratio, it's a variable interval. So it could come at any time and you have no idea. So in this case, you have to be prepared. If you wrote that post or posted that picture and you really wanted a lot of responses, or you wanted that one person to notice it, you're going to continuously check back to find out if they have, because you want to know that moment when they liked it or loved it or whatever, right? So I always use this example, and I don't want to give anybody any worries, because not only do I not have quizzes in Psych 1, I don't have pop quizzes, because that would be a quiz, right? So I always say in class, if I were to tell you guys that you'd have a pop quiz, and I say, don't freak out, because I'm not actually going to give one. This is just my example. Well, obviously you know that now. You're a little more comfortable just listening to this recording. It's not hitting you spontaneously. But if I were to say that there was going to be a pop quiz between, tomorrow and the end of the course, but I don't tell you when that pop quiz is coming, every time you look back at this class, you're going to have to be prepared, right? Depending on where we are in the schedule. So you're always going to have to study in case I say, right now is the pop quiz, right? Obviously, again, it wouldn't work this way with recordings, but you get the idea, right? It could be now, it could be tomorrow, it could be 2 weeks from now, it could be the last day before the final, right? The last day of regular class, quote unquote, before the final. Either way, you always have to be prepared. So that's why a variable interval, Skinner found out, would cause the most steady responding, because you always have to be prepared. In a fixed interval, you can learn to figure out the pattern of when you're going to get a reward, and you can just wait until around that time. With a fixed ratio, you figure out how many responses you need to make. Even with a variable ratio, you know that it's contingent on responses. So a variable interval will cause the most steady responding, because you always have to be prepared for it, because you never know when it's coming. All right. We talked about reinforcement, and now we need to talk about the other thing, punishment. Punishment is the opposite of reinforcement. So remember, just a review for reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, the only thing that matters as far as your responses or your outcomes is the fact that it is a reinforcement. Whether you're introducing something pleasant or taking away something unpleasant, which would be negative, the result is behavior increases. For punishment, whether it's positive or negative, just using the word punishment means it is negative or undesirable, right? So punishment administers an undesirable consequences or withdraws something that you like in order to decrease the frequency of a behavior. If you're doing something bad, again, parenting is the perfect example of operant conditioning. If you are doing something that your parents don't like, we want, as parents, for that behavior to go away. Cussing, saying bad words, writing on the walls, running into traffic, going outside without a mask, these days. Disobedience, not listening to what the parents say. That behavior we want to get squashed. We want to decrease it. So anything that is described as punishment is going to decrease your behavior. I want my kid to stop saying things or behaving badly at the dinner table. So I either introduce something. Remember, positive and negative don't mean good or bad in this case. Reinforcement means increase, punishment means decrease. Positive and negative, just you may need to practice this a little bit just to get it down. Positive means introducing something, negative means taking something away. So positive punishment would be presenting a negative consequence after an undesired behavior, which makes the behavior less likely to happen in the future. And although I don't believe in physical punishment, it is a really, really easy and good example of positive punishment. Giving a spanking, smacking on the arm or the butt, right? So if my kid says a bad word, in my days, in my younger days, my parents would threaten to put soap in my mouth for using bad language and clean that language out of my mouth, clean the dirty language out of my mouth, which if you've ever put soap in your mouth, it's not fun. So that was kind of an old way. But again, also the old school way was to hit, right? So grab a switch, meaning like a tree branch or something, or to grab the belt, use your bare hand, or in my case, my dad would grab the back of the bath brush and hit me on the butt. So that would be an example of positive punishment. If I wrote on the walls or did something I wasn't supposed to do, I would potentially get positive punishment by getting smacked on the butt with a bare hand or the bath brush or something like that. Positive punishment could also be making me go to another room and giving me a timeout. Negative punishment, on the other hand, is removing something I like. So where negative reinforcement would be me increasing my behavior just to get you to stop yelling at me. Okay, I'll clean my room if you stop bugging me. That would be negative reinforcement. Negative punishment is taking away something I like in order for me to stop that bad behavior. So if I was playing a video game and, or I guess we'll use Dr. C because this actually was happening. If he's playing a video game and now he's playing online with his friend across the street and he starts yelling at his friend or using bad words, guess what we do? Buy friend and buy video game system. You get it taken away. If a teenager breaks curfew, maybe you take away the car privileges, right? That would be a negative punishment. You're taking away something they like in order to get them to decrease their behavior. Whereas in negative reinforcement, you're removing something they don't like in order to increase their behavior. Taking an aspirin or a Tylenol in order to get rid of a headache, right? Something that they don't like. So that is positive and negative punishment. Now that you have those concepts down to a degree, the one thing I just mentioned is that, especially today in psychology, we talk about hitting, right? Physical punishment. It's not something that we like. And a lot of times, this is actually going to go into the next lecture, which talks about learning by watching others, because the biggest reason that people say they hit their kids is because, oh, well, my parents hit me and their parents hit them and so on and so on. Doesn't mean that that type of physical punishment of hitting is actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. And the fear, especially the more we know about psychology, is that it's doing more damage than actually getting them to, behave the right way. So I wanted to give you and list, as the book does, 4 major drawbacks of physical punishment and to explain them a little bit. So first of all, when you are hitting somebody, right, when you are physically hitting them, and some people think, a smack on the butt, sometimes it's more than that, right? Some people get carried away, or when in chapter 1, we talked about operational definitions. So this might be that people interpret things differently. Well, smacking them on the butt or hitting them is going to get them to pay attention, and it's better than just yelling or this or that. Well, here's some of the drawbacks of actual physical punishment. I and my wife do not hit our child unless we're just messing around and I'm pretending to smack them, or we're play wrestling or something like that. But that's not actual like physical punishment. I'm just messing around and with no force behind it. And the minute he stops laughing about it, that's when it stops anyway. So why these days do psychologists, responsible psychologists, try to get people to understand that physical punishment is not necessarily the answer? Well, here's some of the drawbacks. First of all, on the left, you can see it says punished behavior is suppressed, not forgotten. So we're trying to get them to reduce that behavior, and punishing them causes them to potentially reduce that behavior, but they still remember getting hit and they still remember it negatively. So this temporary state, the behavior is suppressed, but it doesn't mean that it's forgotten that you've hit them, right? So what this may do, more than get the kid to, to stop what they're doing because of positive punishment, this may actually negatively reinforce the punishing behavior. So that they're thinking, well, the kid won't do this if we threaten to hit them for it. What you want is for them just to learn not to do it, right? So this is not a good way of going about it, because they'll still remember that they were hit. And there's a lot of cases where abuse turns into trauma, and that really affects the way that these people behave as adults. Second on this list is that punishment teaches discrimination among the situations. So maybe it gets them to reduce that negative behavior, but also, remember we talked about generalization and discrimination. It also teaches them that maybe if they talk back, they're not going to get hit, but maybe if they steal something, they are. So really it tells them what things they will get hit for and what things they won't, rather than correcting their overall behavior, right? The third one is one that we talk about trauma and fear a lot in psychology, and traumatic experiences can change the way the brain functions, and they can cause problems that lead to anxiety, depression, and a whole host of other things. So punishment is supposed to be a way to get them to reduce their bad behavior. Oh, well, I don't want you saying bad words. I don't want you writing on the wall. I don't want you running into traffic without looking both ways before you cross the street. I don't want to inflict trauma. If you ever ask any parent, they don't want to inflict trauma in their child. But punishment can teach fear. Rather than them reducing their behavior because it's not what you want from them, they may reduce their behavior simply because they're afraid of you hitting them. Is that really the lesson you're trying to teach your child? In simple operant conditioning, we're trying to say, don't do that. That's not desired behavior. Do that less, and do this, the things that we like, more. This will not only help you under my roof, but it'll help you in the real world when you move out on your own. We don't want to teach fear in our children. We don't want to teach them not to do something because of fear, right? And finally, the last one, which again is one that goes and sort of gets us ready and primed for the next part, which is observational learning, the next lecture, is that physical punishment may increase aggression by modeling aggression as a way to do it. Oh, well, you do something wrong? Here's how I solve that problem, by hitting. So not only will that potentially cause the way that you raise your children, right? If you ask people why they punish their kids with physical punishment, they say, I was spanked when I was a kid, and my dad and mom were spanked when they were kids, and so on and so on, that they learned it by watching what their parents did to them, and they use that in their own parenting, which isn't necessarily the best. And also modeling aggression, showing that if you do something bad, the way that I solve that problem is by hitting. That can also cause bullying, physical bullying, where a kid doesn't like what's happening in school, or someone says something negative about them, and they deal with it the way that they know how, which is hitting. That's what my parents did to me, so I'm going to start doing that. That's a big problem with bullying in schools and outside of schools. And It's not a good excuse when you hear people say, I hit my kids because my parents hit me, because their parents hit them, and blah, 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 blah. Right? So these are 4 of the major drawbacks of physical punishment. So, much like classical conditioning, we can see where operant conditioning is applied in the real world. Applications of operant conditioning, and these are, not limited to these things, but we can see examples of these in school. We see computers and adaptive learning software that if you do well, you get prizes. I know that we started Carter before he ever went to preschool on a program called ABC Mouse, and that you got to, if you did things right, you got to collect points or money, virtual money, and that could actually get you little prizes and things like that on the program. So it's used in teaching and learning. A lot of times in kindergarten, I remember, or in elementary school, that if I got a question right, I got a little gold star next to my chart. We see behavior charts at school with my son. You do well, you get a star. You don't do well, you get no star, or you maybe get a negative point. And those stars can be accumulated for free time, extra recess, being able to go somewhere and do something, right? Get a little bit of freedom. In sports, we see this, right? If there's a penalty, we see in hockey, players go to the penalty box, they get punished. In football, you lose yardage. You can also, for behavior outside of the field, you can get fined. So some of your salary gets taken back. You have to pay a fine. For athletic performance, if you're late for a meeting, you can get benched, and so you lose the amount of time that you play in the game. If you do really well, you can get a better contract. You can get more playing time. You can earn yourself a championship, which is, a reward. So we see reinforcement and reward, and we see punishment in sports. At work, rewards successfully used to increase productivity. You get bonuses and increase. Sometimes you can get more vacation time. If you are hourly and you put in more work, you get paid time and a half for overtime. If your behavior is bad, you can get suspended, you can get fired, right? Things like that. So we see these rewards and punishment at work. And of course, at home, the easiest example we talk about are the basic rules of learning and shaping for parenting. We are trying to get them closer and closer to the desired behaviors overall. The things they do right, we reward. The things they do wrong, we tend to punish, and hope to turn them into a well-rounded individual or set of children when the time comes through our teaching. So the last thing, I think, actually, there should be one more after this. Yep, where we go over that, is looking at using shaping, using reinforcement and extinction, and punishment, depending, in a way that's useful. So I told you I would come back to this example of potty training. So when we look at that as a whole, right, it's not always so easy as just like, okay, today we're going to start potty training and that's it, right? Looking in my own experience with Dr. C when he was 3, my wife and I are both school teachers, which the advantage to that is right after the summer, or right at the beginning of the summer, I should say, right after the spring semester ends, that both of us had some time to be at home as a family, and we actually got to spend time with Carter. Well, I guess that's kind of like right now. If you had a child that was about potty training age, this whole stay-at-home thing would be a great time probably for you to start putting them on a schedule of reinforcement and start shaping towards potty training, maybe, right? So, or brother or sister, nephew or niece, or something like that. So how would we do this? Well, the way that we went about it was, okay, we're going to be home. We're going to be around a lot more in the summer, at least for like 6 weeks or so, while we were around and while school wasn't in session. So let's state a goal, a realistic goal in measurable terms. We want to get him potty trained, hopefully as best we can in the next 5 to 6 weeks, since we're both home. Then we decide how, when, and where we'll need to do that. Okay, well, there may be times where his nanny's going to come over and we still have to go out and run errands or do things together. So What about when we're home versus not at home? So maybe at the beginning, when we're first teaching him, we decided if we're out and we go to the Grove, or we go to the mall, or we go to somewhere like that, that maybe we're not going to try the whole potty training thing, because we don't want to confuse him. Let's do it at home when we're at home and not worry about it so much at first when we're out. So that's part of shaping, right? We go to the baseball game, the Dodger game. We're not going to make him sit on a potty and try to give him an M&M for it. But when we're at home, obviously, yes. And when the nanny's there and we're not there, maybe not. How often are we going to engage in it? Well, we probably want to start continuous reinforcement for the first 10 or 12. We say, okay, when you sit on the potty for the first, 10 times in a row, and maybe we don't tell them that at first, but we just say, every time that you sit on the potty, just on the potty itself, again, don't take off the diaper, none of that, we will give you an M&M. So for the first 10 or 12 times, we give them an M&M, and then maybe we do it, switch to a fixed ratio of, every 5 times he does it, we'll give him one M&M or something like that, right? So we switch to a schedule of reinforcements. Eventually, we want to move to the next step of shaping. So we reinforce the desired behavior, as you saw, for the first 10 or 12 times. Then we reduce the rewards gradually. Now, every 5 times you sit on the potty, we'll give you one. And then eventually we extinguish that. Okay, we're no longer looking at that portion. We're no longer looking at sitting. Now we go to the next step, which I talked about, was now you lift the lid and you just sit on the seat. Okay, so for the first 10 or 12 times, continuous reinforcement. Then we go down to a fixed ratio of every 5 times. And then eventually we go, okay, now you take off the diaper and just sit. You don't have to go, you just sit. And then maybe you just pee. And then eventually it's, okay, now you pee and or poop. You're going to sit on this when it's time for you to, when you have to go 1 or 2. And not had any accidents, then we'll give you, a piece of candy or something like that. And eventually that shapes the behavior of potty training. So there's your example. So the last thing we're going to look at for this lecture is the differences between classical conditioning and operant conditioning. The basic idea in classical conditioning is that it is unconscious and the organism associates events automatically. Your brain, or this animal's brain, automatically associates between two things and causes an automatic response. So the organism associates the events and the responses are involuntary and automatic, aka unconscious. In operant conditioning with Skinner, the organism associates its own behavior with the resulting events. So it is a conscious, explicit process. The human or the animal knows it's making a behavior, like the cat pushing the lever to escape the box and eat the fishy food. The child to eat their broccoli. They know that they're doing it. It is conscious. And so the response is voluntary. It operates on the environment. It is something that they know will either get a reinforcing reward like ice cream or a punishment like a spanking, which again we try to stay away from. Or for the cat, we can think of a squirt in the face with water. In acquisition, it's the same thing. We are associating the events. In classical conditioning, the neutral stimulus is paired with the unconditioned stimulus to become a conditioned stimulus. Bell means nothing at first. When it's paired with the food, it eventually signals that food is coming. In acquisition for operant conditioning, you are doing a behavior like eating broccoli, and if you get a reward for it, you are going to increase your behavior. If you are pushing a lever and you get sprayed in the face, you are less likely to do that in the future. So you are associating your response with either a good or bad outcome, consequence. In extinction, again, same thing. You're trying to reduce the behavior. So in this case, the conditioned response decreases or goes down to 0 in classical conditioning. when the CS, conditioned stimulus, is repeatedly presented alone. If I keep ringing the bell after bell food, bell food, bell food, I keep ringing the bell and no food comes, eventually, it's an automatic process. The brain realizes, oh, these things are no longer associated, so there's no need to respond. In operant conditioning, we are extinguishing, maybe we are shaping, and we're trying to move on to the next phase. So just sitting on the toilet seat is not enough now. Now we want you to go to the next phase, so we are no longer going to reinforce you just for sitting there. So your responding decreases when the reinforcement stops. I am no longer giving M&Ms for doing this. And the idea of spontaneous recovery, if you recall from the last lecture, and you may have just listened to that lecture 5 minutes before you started this one. It's the idea or reappearance after a rest period of the extinguished response. So you pair the bell with the food on day 1 and you reach acquisition. On day 2, you ring the bell by itself and the response goes back down to 0. So that's extinction. You've effectively extinguished that response. Day 3, you do nothing. And day 4, you ring the bell once and you get the dog to drool or salivate a tiny bit before the brain is like, oh, wait, that's not a thing anymore. But that spontaneous recovery shows, A, that we don't unlearn things, right? And B, that we still have a memory for those things. Our brain just realizes they're not paired anymore. So we can also have that idea with operant conditioning. You can have somebody, right? Your kiddo hasn't done that, and then one day maybe they just sit on the potty and they go, okay, I want my M&M, and you're like, no, that's not how this works, because we're not doing that anymore. You're on the next phase where you without a diaper, you sit on the potty. Oh, right. So the response would be similar, or the reappearance after a rest period of that extinguished response, because maybe they forgot or something like that. And we also have the ideas of generalization and discrimination between the two, which are very similar. In generalization, a bell of any kind might produce a response, maybe not as strong as the original bell, but as I told you in the last lecture, you are training the dog to the food by the sound of a bell, diddling. So anything close to that, the bike bell, ring, 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 or the doorbell, ding dong, can cause that response. In operant conditioning, if you're giving them an M&M for a reward, any sort of chocolate product like that could probably work. It could be a Reese's Pieces. It could be, a lollipop. So anything close to that, that's also reinforcing, like any kind of dessert. If you're going to give your kid dessert for eating their broccoli, it doesn't have to be ice cream, right? I can give my kid a brownie and he'd be just as happy to eat his broccoli if he got a brownie as if he did ice cream. And even more so if the ice cream was on top of the brownie. But that's neither here nor there. So with discrimination, it also means that they can tell the difference between things that are not the same. In this case, the example I gave you, right? So the learned ability to distinguish between a CS and other stimuli that do not signal it. So for Pavlov and his dog, a light was not going to be a sound like a bell. A metronome is not a bell. A vibration on the dog's body was not going to do it if they were conditioned to a bell. Even a different sound, like a car horn back in the day, auga, was not going to cause that response, because the dog's brain could make that distinction between things that are and are not. If I'm giving, in operant conditioning, an organism learns that certain responses, but maybe not others, will be reinforced. So if the kid sits on the potty, they'll get an M&M, but if they just put their foot on the potty or stand on the potty, not going to get rewarded. And also, it may not be the same if the reward is different enough. So you give them an M&M, right? And let's say some people like chips, but what if it's Cool Ranch Doritos for me? That is not a reward, right? I can discriminate. I am not going to do things for a reward if you're going to give me Cool Ranch Doritos, because to me, that's a punishment, right? So when we come back for the third lecture, we will talk about the influences on learning, and we will talk about those other two types of learning, which are cognitive learning, which just means using your cognitive and thinking thought process skills with learning in combination, and of course that other big one that we talked about, observational learning. So for the moment, I bid you adieu, goodbye, and we will catch up soon. Again, please watch the videos and look at the um, things that I gave you, and there will be another homework assignment for operant conditioning. This is the one that we normally do in class. For the last one, classical conditioning, it's not always one that I have time to do, although I must admit that it does help you guys out in the long run for exams when you are able to do both of the assignments. I'll talk to you soon.